Story about dwarves, drinking, fighting, brawling, making coarse jokes. Sounds up your alley. This one's probably for you. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about Ravine of Blood and Shadow by D.P. Pryor or Derek Pryor. I've seen it listed both ways a couple times there, which is the first book in the annals of the Nameless Dwarf. And this is following Karnak, who does have a name at the start of the story, who is a Ravine guard and is kind of having a lot of things change and is sort of, this feels like a sort of springboarding what's going to be happening. But so he's a guard, and then there's a mystery going on with somebody killed and something missing, and he's kind of trying to figure that out. And then it's sort of setting up the bigger events to happen. But of course, not without quite a lot of drinking, taverns, brawling, making all kinds of coarse jokes and that type of stuff. And there's quite a lot of that. And this does also, I will say, have a fair bit of game lit feel, I would say, especially the further you get in. Not lit RPG, because there's no like stats or like anything like that, but just like it kind of feels very video gamey, especially toward the end. And I think largely this is another one where I feel like those elements should work a little bit better for me, especially since I love Dungeon Crawler Carl so much. But Dungeon Crawler Carl has ended up still really feeling like the exception, where it's just whenever I try anything adjacent to that, I tend to not like it that much. That one just works for whatever reason. But this is one where it's just like those elements are a little bit less me. And if I'm like really enjoying a story, I'm probably not going to care that much about some of those elements. But this one, I was never particularly pulled in. And the more of the game kind of feel we got, I was just kind of like, I found parts to be pretty predictable, and I never felt particularly invested. Now, the way this opens, I will just say, it does set the tone really well, so you kind of know what you're getting into, because it literally opens with Karnak being born, except his father has to assist with the C-section with a sword, and then yanks the baby out on by the beard, because apparently dwarves do have beards even when they're born. And like that's the start. I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about this. And then as I went going, I never really went the other way. This ended up being a 2-star for me, and it's not a terrible book by any means. I think, like I said, the people who like, the game lit RPG, there's a lot of that where it's like, a lot of the vulgar humor, that style, lots of action and that kind of thing. I think this will work really well if you like those things. I just unfortunately am not a huge fan of those elements, and it has to be just done really, really well to potentially work. And even then, it's sort of hit or miss, because I'm not a huge fan. Something that it's on the progression side more than like game lit, but something that some elements of this reminded me a little bit of is Cradle, which I know is super popular. Also didn't care for Cradle, so I don't know. I'd be curious if you've read both. Let me know if that makes sense, or if you see that at all, or if it's just me. But it's one of those things where even though I did not particularly enjoy this, I think this would work really well. I actually legitimately, I wasn't even finished with it yet, and I'm like, I'm not enjoying this, but immediately I thought of somebody and I went and recommended it. I'm like, you should check this out. You're gonna love this. So I'm not at all saying it's bad. It just didn't really particularly work for me and end up being my thing. But yeah, we're following Karnak, and the Nameless Dwarf part, we find out that was in old punishment. Basically, when the population was too small and they didn't want to put any dwarfs to death, they would make them nameless, and that's supposed to be like worse. And so I think this is sort of like, it's meant to be the setup book. But there's a lot of the dwarf stuff, the jokes, the drinking and taverns. There's a plot line where somebody's coming out with a new brew of beer, and they're like doing samples, and I'm just like, I didn't care for it. It just never really pulled me in, for the most part. But we're seeing what's going to be happening, and there were a couple of things I found quite predictable. And then at the end, like I said, we really started getting the sort of video game feel. There were some really cool action scenes and some brutal action scenes at parts as well, but just kind of had a lot of that feel, which is just something that's very, very hit or miss for me. And one particular thing that did annoy me is it uses a trope where a character who's just never noticed the person right next to them that they've been friends with for a long time as being a potential romantic partner, and then as soon as they're unavailable, they're so upset and mad about it. And so I feel like sometimes when you have a story that I'm already sort of mixed on, then you throw in like a trope like that annoys me. It can just kind of bring it down. So there are some things like that I just didn't particularly care for. I feel like this is one of those things too. If I would have been slightly higher on this, I might have still tried, because I imagine it's going to be more like, just the action, the different things happening with what this is setting up. I imagine it gets better from here. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I was invested enough even in this to want to continue. But again, I think this would work a lot better for some other people, who have that little bit of different taste. Whereas for me, this one is like I said, whenever you're talking like the gamelet, that type of thing, it's always hit or miss, and this one was unfortunately the miss side for me. I have no idea how to even tell. So like this was a completely valid suggestion. This was a patron pick for me to read this one. It's a completely valid suggestion because I've had weird ones. Like I liked Beware of Chicken. I don't understand why I liked Beware of Chicken, but I did. And I did not expect to enjoy that one at all. And so this one sounded interesting, and it didn't end up working. And so it's hard to know sometimes. But yeah, those really are my thoughts on Ravine of Blood and Shadow, first book in Annals of the Nameless Dwarf. Let me know if you've read this, or like I said, if any of my comparisons made sense to you, or if you landed super differently, just because I feel like there's several people, and one I immediately recommended it to, I think would really enjoy this. So I still think it'll work. Unfortunately, just wasn't for me. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.